Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Delighted to welcome you to the third Policy Roundtable, which the Women's Economic Imperative is running in partnership with the Global Women's Enterprise Policy Group. My name's Dinah Bennett and I'm with the Women's Economic Imperative, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today to participate in this panel of stellar academics from Australia and New Zealand, looking at women and social entrepreneurship, policy, opportunity and policy. Delighted that we're actually collaborating with the I'm just admitting people I speak, with GWET, the Global Women's Enterprise Policy Group. And I'd like to invite my colleague, Professor Colette Henry, to welcome you and to introduce the chair of the panel for today.
Yes, thanks, Dinah. And again, wherever you are in the world today, whatever time zone you're in, you're very welcome. And thanks for joining us for this roundtable session. As Dinah said, I'm Colette Henry. I'm based in Dundalk Institute of Technology. I'm also linked to Griffith University, Australia, and Jönköping University in Sweden. I chair the Global WEP group, which is the Global Women's Entrepreneurship Policy Research Network. And currently we have over 30 research teams involved around the world. And the one thing we have in common is that we're all dedicated to researching women's entrepreneurship, looking at the policy perspective and trying to find out if there are any hidden biases, uncover those, and at the same time uncover best practices in women's entrepreneurship policy around the globe. We've been very busy over the last number of years since we started in 2014 in Stockholm. We have produced a number of internal reports, external reports, book chapters, journal articles. We've held a number of webinars. And in 2021, we produced a major report with the OECD, Women's Entrepreneurship Policy Through a Gender Lens. So if you haven't had an opportunity to read that, I consider you to do so, because I get the sense that the topic today, women's social entrepreneurship, we'll probably find some commonalities there between barriers and challenges in women's commercial entrepreneurship. So with that, I'd like to hand you over to the moderator for today, Professor Christine Woods. And Christine, I'm really looking forward to a great session, so I'll hand over to you.
Kia ora, hello everyone, and thank you very much, Colette, and thank you very much for the opportunity to join with everybody today in this conversation. So the way we would like to run this session is to, first of all, I'll invite the three panelists to just very briefly introduce themselves. And then what we're going to do is to speak with each of them in turn to ask a couple of questions that are focused specifically on their research interests in this area. And then to, after that conversation, then to turn and specifically focus on the policy challenges. So first of all, I'd like to invite Persephone to introduce herself, and then Joe, and then Kerry.
Kia ora, everybody. My name is Persephone. I undertook my doctoral degree at the University of East Anglia in the UK, and my research focused on the experiences of women social entrepreneurs in the UK context. So that's my kind of research background. It still represents my research interests. I'm now postdocing at the University of Auckland within the Aotearoa Centre for Women's Entrepreneurship. For entrepreneurial women, apologies. And so today I'm just going to be talking about a little bit around the findings from my own research, which, as I said, was UK based, and about the policy implications that came from the UK context at the time. So that's me.
Great. Thank you, Persephone. Joe.
Hello, everybody. Acknowledging that I come to you from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. My name's Jo Barrackett. I'm the director of the Melbourne Social Equity Institute, which is an interdisciplinary research institute at the University of Melbourne that focuses on creating a fairer world through community engaged and co-productive interdisciplinary research. I guess the best handle for me is that I'm Australia's premier researcher, so first, not necessarily best, of social enterprise. I've been working with and for and about social enterprise for about 26 years. That's probably enough.
Great, thanks, Jo. Kitty.
Kia ora, everybody. Ko Hikurangi te maunga. Hikurangi is my mountain. Ko Waiapu te awa. The Waiapu is my river. Ko Ngāti Porau te iwi. I am from the tribal people of Poraurangi. Ko Kiri aho. My name is Kiri. Lovely to be here on this fresh morning in New Zealand. I am mostly passionate about helping Māori to realise the aspirations they have for their lands, and that drives me to understand entrepreneurship and all the facets that come with that. So, kia ora.
Thanks, Kitty. And I realised I didn't actually introduce myself. So I'm the Teresa Gadding Chair for Women in Entrepreneurship here at the University of Auckland, Waipapatau Matarau, and I'm the Director for the Aotearoa Centre for Enterprising Women. So without further ado, we'd like to start with Persephone. Persephone, you mentioned that you did your doctoral research in the UK. And focused on gender and social entrepreneurship. What do you consider to be the key issues that are facing women social entrepreneurs? I appreciate, just briefly, because we could really have the whole hour just focused on that.
So I think that for me, the challenges faced by women social entrepreneurs in the context in which I undertook my research, which was the UK. And so these situations may not be applicable to other contexts, but the major challenges, I think, are largely the same as for mainstream women entrepreneurs. So the masculinization of entrepreneurship and the kind of lack of fit, therefore, of women and women identified peoples in that space. The associated issues around legitimacy, both in the business context and the social context associated with that, and the inequitable division of domestic labour is also massively problematic for women generally. In terms of the challenges that they face that are similar to other social entrepreneurs, then I think that those coalesce around managing the challenges of having a double or triple bottom line, potentially additional administrative or reporting burdens around that. So potentially reporting to charities, commission, to funders, to stakeholders, and so on. So just an additional body of work that perhaps doesn't actually affect mainstream entrepreneurs. And then, given the kind of riskiness generally of startup businesses, having that additional social and environmental focus means that there is increased precarity. So I think that that's also a very serious issue. And then finally, so specific to women social entrepreneurs, I think that, well, from my research, I found that there really is a significant challenges around legitimacy associated with the masculinization of entrepreneurship, which is a barrier obviously for women generally, but then there's also the simultaneously happening the feminization of the social and its association with often its association with charitable acts. So then there is an association with kind of amateurish voluntarism, you know, so there's all of those challenges. And then in terms of kind of general context, then, you know, trying to deal as all entrepreneurs are with the COVID, post-COVID context, but for social entrepreneurs that has a particular potential impact, which is around the fact that as as people have less disposable income, then they're looking to focus more on the price of the services or goods that they're buying over perhaps the nice to have social and environmental impact that are associated with goods and services provided by social enterprise. So I think that there's a whole package of issues.
Yeah, and that challenge of maintaining financial sustainability
Precisely,
in such a precarious context at the moment. And, you know, financial sustainability applies for all of the entrepreneurial ventures, but here you've got all of these dynamics coming into play.
Yeah.
So if we look back a little bit at the UK context, and it was kind of at the global forefront of the social enterprise movement, you might say, in the 90s. But it seems, at least from where I'm sitting, there's kind of less of a conversation in that space at the moment. What do you think's happened, you know, in that subsequent? I mean, I know we've got COVID more recently, but what else do you think has been happening in that time frame from the 1990s?
I think, well, to kind of contextualize, so in the early 2000s onwards, the new Labour government. So the new Labour government were in power from 1994 to 2010. They were pursuing a neoliberal agenda, so that meant the reduction of government investment and spending, government involvement and spending in the public sector as much as possible. And to that end, they really wanted to promote social enterprise as a tool, but a very major tool in their efforts to achieve their political goals. Now, the benefits were that they invested incredibly heavily in the development of a really robust and regionally dispersed social enterprise support ecosystem. And they also promoted social enterprise really heavily over a very significant period of time through the media, through the development of a school for social entrepreneurs, which was basically a business school specifically devoted to the development of social entrepreneurs, through an ambassador scheme. So they really raised the profile of social enterprise, but it was specifically around achieving their political agenda. What also happened at the same time was that through that process, the types of social entrepreneurs that they were promoting were people like Jamie Oliver, who is a celebrity chef in the UK. He set up a number of restaurants that were providing employment opportunities for disadvantaged people. So people leaving prison, people who've been long-term unemployed, people with health or mental health disabilities. And for example, John Bird, who established The Big Issue. So there was kind of a transference of this heroic masculinity that we've seen in mainstream entrepreneurship into the social entrepreneurship sector. So I guess that in terms of kind of the wins was that, as I said, this really, really robust and brilliant, actually, in my opinion, at the time, social enterprise ecosystem, support ecosystem developed. There was a proliferation of social enterprises. A new legal form was created specifically for social enterprise in the UK called the Community Interest Company. And there was really enhanced awareness and interest in social enterprise. But there were really limited public benefits in terms of the political agenda. So for the National Health Service, which was a particular focus of this agenda, a political agenda, and there was also a desire to sort of bring the discipline of business into the social and charitable sector, which again was a political agenda, and in the end it didn't really work. By the time the next government was elected in 2010, which was a Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition, they took away all the funding, and the ecosystem that had been established and was really working just disappeared. In terms of kind of the lessons learned, I think that policy around social enterprise works best when it helps to raise awareness and the social legitimacy of social enterprise amongst the public. And that really happened at the time, but I don't know really whether it still exists now in the absence that has happened in the last 15 years. Providing some funding and support to startup funding for social enterprises that recognises the enhanced risk, and it responds to the needs of the sector rather than co-opting it for a political agenda.
Thank you. I will return to some of those policy challenges, I think, at the end. So thank you for providing that context. We're going to move now to Jo. And as Jo said, she talked about a premier academic, I'd say a leading academic in the social economy field. What do you consider to be the most challenging and pressing issues related to social entrepreneurship and gender, Jo?
Well, I think Persephone's said a great deal that I would agree with. But in the academic sense, really just a complete lack of investigation, of theorization, of, unpacking understanding about the gendered dynamics of social entrepreneurship, the implications, some of which Persephone's outlined. So with some notable exceptions, including our colleague Anne, who I can see sitting here, there really hasn't been a lot of work published in the area. And then when you move into intersectional questions, going to Persephone's comment about, where women and women social entrepreneurs are sitting, then even less. And just to echo what Persephone was saying, that idea about the heroic individual male entrepreneur really took hold, particularly in the North American conceptions of social entrepreneurship in the 1990s and early 2000s. And that became the sort of popular valorization of what social entrepreneurship was, and really left out what, Gibson Graham have done a lot of work on what they call the care economy, particularly women's unpaid care economy, which, all the work of care that has been done by women through business and non-business means over many years. In fact, there's a think tank in Australia that recently told me that the figure they've done the modelling on the GDP of the unpaid care economy in Australia, and it's half of national GDP. Anyway, sorry, I'm waffling because it's 5 o'clock in the morning.
No, not at all.
But I think the other things that I'd just say is I do think it's important that we unpack what we're talking about when we talk about social enterprise, because I think, Persephone's given a very clear account of the UK developments from the late 1990s, although interestingly, the cooperative movement was the movement that actually got this on the agenda before New Labour was in government with the people who were in opposition at the time, who then subsequently became ministers. But once the political agenda that Persephone was talking about was taken forward, the co-op movement kind of fell away, so that wasn't prioritised in the policy agenda. But I do think we need to be clear on what we're talking about, because social enterprise includes the neoliberalisation of the welfare state and the creation of business to replace public services. It also includes an economic democratic movement, so the cooperative movement. And these are all Western historical versions. I won't speak for Indigenous conceptions of social entrepreneurship because Kiri's here. And then we've also seen social enterprises respond to the new social movements of the 1960s and 70s. So, ideas about community and member-owned businesses. And also we've seen a sort of wave under the social innovation agenda, which is much more focused on finding new and improved solutions to complex social problems that are addressing systems change using the market as a method. So I think we do need to just be clear when we're talking about there's actually social enterprise is one label for a lot of different activity. And so then the gender dimensions of that become, quite complicated to unpack. And I won't attempt to do it too much, but I would just say that, alongside all the things Persephone said, one thing we do know from research I've done in Australia is that women are much better represented, equally represented in leadership in social enterprises in Australia, but not in governance. That's where we still fall down. And also related to Stephanie's comments on legitimisation, we see the mirroring of mainstream entrepreneurship for women not getting access to finance on an equitable basis for their enterprises. But on the positive side, or the hopeful side, I guess one of the questions that I'm interested in from a gender and diverse economies perspective is the extent to which women's social entrepreneurship and women's entrepreneurship more broadly might actually allow us to create better economies. I think that, you know, that's also an underexplored area, but I think it's important.
Yeah, a couple of things that talking about the caring economy. There was a book in New Zealand written a number of years ago called False Economy, and the fact that we have so much of the work done in our economy by women unpaid, you know, that notion of false economy. And the other around this, you know, kind of the heroic male. I was recently teaching a course on women in entrepreneurship, and I was asked why it was women in entrepreneurship and not just entrepreneurship. And I said, well, because really how we should be defining it is men and entrepreneurship, because, you know, the underlying assumptions that heteronormative kind of masculine approach. So thank you. You know, just reiterating some really good points. But as we have this conversation, you know, we're talking about men and we're talking about women, you know, what's being done in research that moves beyond this kind of binary way of thinking within social entrepreneurship?
Well, even less. We know across multiple jurisdictions that social enterprises themselves have missions that are relevant to transgender and non-binary people, but you know, the research is just not there. I think one of the reasons why I mentioned that in our preparations for this discussion is actually think about policy implications, because you know, we're seeing it over and over again, the replication of issues that have happened before through positivist science, which is relied upon by policymakers, is that we leave out, you know, groups that aren't statistically significant, and we really need to get beyond the binary in relation to gender, but more broadly in terms of policy work, we need to be doing better science. If a particular approach doesn't actually allow for understanding of people in our communities, then we need to find better ways. And that's, I think, the main message that I wanted to convey in relation to this particular issue.
Yes, and kind of picking up on that intersectionality around other areas as well, you know, however that plays out, that kind of sitting as our responsibility to kind of be exploring and looking at those from the positions of kind of privilege that many of us have within the academy, I think.
Yeah.
Jo, we'll move now to the Indigenous kind of context. Not that we're asking you, Kiri, to speak for every Indigenous community. What we'd like to hear is from you as a Māori entrepreneurship scholar. Could you kind of tease out some of those challenges that you kind of engage with from a Western concept of what social entrepreneurship and what entrepreneurship is, and how you kind of perceive that from a Tau Māori, from a Māori worldview?
Okay, Chris. Yeah, so I think if we look at what Māori entrepreneurship is, from the activities that Māori entrepreneurs engage in, I kind of separate it or categorize it into four kind of activities. And the first one is activities where entrepreneurs or communities work with what we call taonga. And taonga is very simply the Māori word for treasures. And taonga are treasures that are so special, they need protection, they need to be worked with in a way that they're going to be around for many generations. So the first one, they tend to be in activities that work with taonga or treasures. these can be things like our biodiversity, our lands, our language. These are all treasures. The second one is activities that leave legacies. So we get Māori entrepreneurs that are typically involved in work that have intergenerational impacts, and they're thinking very forward into the future. The third one is activities that enhance whānau or communities. So they're activities that are very socially orientated. And the last one, I kind of just threw this one in at the end, is activities that reverse the effects of colonization. So a lot of entrepreneurial work has to address healing and the devastating impacts that colonization has placed on our communities. I just want to quickly comment on the idea of the masculine hero, because we see this in our communities popping up every now and again. We get a masculine hero turning up into our tribal communities with these wonderful, brilliant ideas of how they're going to save us. And our communities are at risk of being seduced by these types of people, and they often come with contracts and sign your life away, and you give us your lands, we'll lead you into the light. So I just wanted to highlight that that's a risk for some of our communities to not be overly seduced by these types of characters.
So within that context of those four different types, and not wanting these masculine heroes to coming in and riding roughshod, where do you see entrepreneurship particularly empowering wahine Māori women? How has that been a vehicle for their empowerment across all of these areas, Keri?
So the idea, so we have a term, I guess, that is used a lot in New Zealand called mana wahine. And mana is a type of power or authority or influence or charisma that is associated with being a woman. And so I just want to kind of point out how Māori social constructions of women, they are typically portrayed as people who are very dignified, very worthy, they're nurturers, they're decision makers.
You want me to get something?
Oh, hang on, sorry, my dad's just...
Isn't that perfect timing? I think that's Keri's dad asking if she wants a cup of tea. So that's a perfect example of an ally there. Was that your dad?
Yeah, he's gone now. So
that timing couldn't have been better.
But yeah, he's on his way to Gisborne, so he wanted to know if I wanted anything. But yeah, so the women are portrayed as very important. And so it's a very contrasting experience for Māori women to not feel that in other realms of society. So how entrepreneurship supports Māori women is to have mana as a woman in our society does not... You don't have to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
you're worthy regardless of what you do. And I think I just want to make.
So it's it's just seen as one of many activities that could be engaged in.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that you have that, particularly when you're kind of looking at those first three areas, tonga, legacies, and whānau. If I think about and it seems as though all of those three, engaging in those three, the wahine Māori that I've kind of worked with, all of those then endeavour to reverse the impact of colonisation and the impacts that have had on people.
I just thought if I can quickly say a quote that my mother used on a program that she was interviewed for, and so it's a powerful woman is someone who knows herself. So she says, "Me mohio te wahine he aha kei mua I aia." A woman who knows what is in front of her, he aha kei muri, what's behind her, he aha kei ona taha, what's on either side, he aha kei runga, he aha kei raro, what is above and what is below. Me mohio aia I ngā āhua ana ki here. She knows herself wherever she goes. So a powerful, this is how a Māori woman is conceived or constructed in our society. She's a person who knows herself.
Kia ora, Kerry. Thank you very much. So, folks, what we're going to do now is turn the final part of this conversation to the to the policy issues, challenges, implications. So coming back to you, Persephone, if you think about the I guess the positive lessons that have been learned, what do you think are the key areas that policymakers should be focusing on regarding gender and social entrepreneurship?
I think that going back to what I mentioned earlier and what's been mentioned also by Jo, that inequitable division of domestic labour and caring is just so central, and dealing with that through policy is vital, I think, to releasing the full potential of women, full stop, but particularly within the entrepreneurial and then social entrepreneurial spaces also. So things like using policy to as a tool to help provide high quality, affordable, flexible local childcare. Ensuring that universal extended paid maternity leave, shared parental leave is available to all families. Encouraging flexible working as standard, particularly when employers are dealing or have small children at home, because that just tends to be a very chaotic time regardless. I think in an ideal world, I would love to see policy being used as a tool to really embed equality, diversity and inclusion training and awareness into society. But particularly, I would love to see it, taught in schools in an age appropriate way, and then also taught within the economic context, so to managers and to directors and so on. So things, yeah, exactly, things around conscious and unconscious bias, the toxicity of the hustle culture, the benefits that can be derived by through flexible working practices around kind of employee well-being, loyalty, productivity, so on. And then for me, I would also like to see conversations emerging, and hopefully there will be within the global context. It seems to be moving in that direction, but around unionization and collective action to actually bring people together to improve the lot of workers, rather than still having people very fragmented and this kind of very individualist personal choice framing of what are actually structural issues. In terms of targeted gender aware support, I'd love to see policy used to develop a network of EDI trained business support and development professionals, so who really understand the gender issues, the Indigenous issue, who just understand it and can respond in appropriate ways. I'd like to see local accessible professional development and support for potential social entrepreneurs. Access to startup mentoring, I think, is very important, and is certainly something that has emerged in the literature as being largely, or not largely absent, but difficult to come by potentially. As I mentioned earlier, startup grants around social entrepreneurs that recognise that additional risk associated with a double or triple bottom line, and then really replicating what we saw in the UK and in the early sort of 2000s to 2010, around the development of local, regional, national, and then international networks that allow people to collaborate and just increase impact, find each other and collaborate in those ways. And then finally, I think being able to have channels to lobby governments that actually, you know, as Colette mentioned, to be able to recognise that actually the evidence that is used to inform policy is often not fit for purpose in terms of what's actually needed. So actually being able to feed into government policy making for the sector, I think is incredibly important.
Kia ora, thanks Persephone. Jo, what would you add to that in terms of the policy landscape, both in terms of serving women and the non-binary community that you kind of alluded to earlier?
So just to add to Persephone's comments, I mean, gender equity needs to be a fundamental, investment and commitment of governments before you even get to social entrepreneurship. And apart from what Persephone talked about with regard to paid and unpaid care inequities, I think most of the countries in the world that are engaged in social entrepreneurship are still, not all of them, but most of them are still, practicing huge inequities in educational opportunities. We've got, in many countries where this stuff's become politically popular, we've got residual welfare regimes where, there's great stigma attached to being a recipient of social services and welfare benefits, rather than transitional models where there's limited stigma attached. And so it's easier for people to move in and out of workforce, training, parenting, caring, entrepreneurship, etc. So there's issues there. Also, continued persistent gender inequities in pay structures and in business governance. I don't know how bad that is in other countries, but in Australia, it's absolutely appalling. The underrepresentation of women and non-binary people in governance of business generally is dreadful. In terms of applying the gender lens in relation to social enterprise and social entrepreneurship, I mean, one thing more broadly I think is needed from a policy perspective is simple acknowledgement of the value and benefit of the social and solidarity economic contributions. And colleagues will be aware of the OECD's recent acceptance of the recommendation, acknowledging that. And not just because it's intrinsically valuable, but also because, as they pointed out, it's central to a just and sustainable economic transition, which if we don't achieve, that's the end of the planet. So it seems pretty fundamental and existential to me. But in terms of the specifics of policy related to social enterprise, social entrepreneurs, as I mentioned at the beginning, gender equity with regard to social finance is critical, and that's partly about doing some kind of equal opportunity around access to social finance, but it's also about recognising that different forms of social enterprise require different kinds of financial products. And that's actually been a challenge, I think, for a number of specific groups of social entrepreneurs who practice different kinds of social enterprise. So if I, think about some of the activities that Kiri described, they require different kinds of finance and access to resources to, the heroic male entrepreneur, Jamie Oliver type models. The other thing, I guess, which is probably a bit more of a big deal in Australia at the moment than it is in some other contexts, is around market stimulation activities and public procurement. So social procurement's, relatively popular in the Australian context at the moment. I think it's sort of fallen away to some degree in other countries, but so that's where government uses the lever of procurement to stimulate markets for social enterprises and other, in the Australian context, Indigenous owned businesses to create opportunities for the communities that they represent. But the areas where that that lever's being pulled is usually in construction, which is a highly masculinized industry. So there needs to be attention by governments given to what policy levers they're pulling and the impacts that they have in terms of the sort of gender patterns within the economy and what that might mean for social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, both the intended and unintended consequences of those decisions. Thanks, Joe. Kiri, from a Māori perspective, what would you like to see in place to better support both Māori entrepreneurship, or more specifically wahine Māori entrepreneurs?
Kia ora. I just got 2 points to make, and I support and endorse what my fellow presenters have suggested. So that, much needed space that needs more consideration. But I just want to make 2 points. First of all is just to bring the conversation back to our bodies, and that the woman's body is special and unique. In Māori, we have what we call whare tangata, which refers to the womb of the woman. And whare means house, and tangata means person. So the whare tangata holds people. So because women have whare tangata, that shapes the way we are in the world, the way we think about the world. The decisions that we have to make are completely impacted by our bodies. So I just wanted to bring the conversation back to that. And second, in addition to what my fellow presenters have suggested, I think for Māori, we also need trauma-informed entrepreneurship. Because as we try to activate entrepreneurship within our communities, we are inevitably faced with trauma responses, and that can manifest as sabotage or kind of blocking or stopping, or all these kind of things that come with trauma. So I'd like to see policy that addresses trauma-informed types of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, so the impacts of colonization and that kind of behaviour that occurs within particular tribal groups, let alone the impact of what's happening externally. And
because trauma can stop you from being who you really are. Yeah. And the bigger the trauma, the harder it is to get there. So yeah.
And that notion that is intergenerational, and it plays through in the generations. Kia ora, thank you. So a wide range of things that we've covered. We've got some time now, as we hoped, to take any questions that may come from anybody that's sitting around. So there may be questions for panelists back to other panelists, or from anybody that's watching. So please feel free to. It's a small group. Please feel free to unmute and ask any questions. Yes, Joan.
Hello, fantastic conversations there, Kiri. This isn't the question, but I can't be helped struck by the similarities in what you were talking about. I know it's completely different, Kiri, but the Tonga, the legacy in the community. My parents are in their 80s, their mid-80s, and they run a very small sheep farm away in the middle of nowhere in Ireland, and these are the things that really matter to them, Kiri. And the man is still a kind of the breadwinner, but the woman is very, very, very respected in the community. Absolutely, brilliant. But that wasn't really the question. I just I suppose wanted to say that from my experience, I work in the area of gender budgeting and gender equality, and there are a lot of initiatives that are going on at the moment that provide some opportunity for us to do research and in terms of how these initiatives impact on social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship in general. And I was thinking of three in particular. For example, the funded early learning and childcare strategy in Scotland, where families are provided with quite a lot of financial support in terms of their childcare arrangements. And there's bound to be, if somebody would do a bit of research in that area, we could look at the impact of that, and then we could draw the good lessons and, relate those to other countries. There's also the whole concept of social value in construction, which is something that we in particular are going to look at in terms of apprenticeships and trying to get more female apprenticeships in construction. There's a new law has been passed in England. It was about a year ago, and we also have it in Northern Ireland, where I think it's 10% of the construction contract value has to be devoted to this social value concept. So there is opportunity here to look at these things. And then the third thing that I was thinking about is the EU's work-life directive and the right to flexible working. And that's been enacted I know in Ireland, I don't know about it, it's bound to be enacted in the rest of Europe by now, I think it was sometime in 2022. And I think that provides a great opportunity as well for us to look at the impact. Those are three things that the speakers here have mentioned that are problematic. And I think they provide a great opportunity maybe for us to look at the outworkings of these things and whether or not they're actually supportive of female entrepreneurship in this space and in other spaces. I also put up a link there. There's quite a lot of work has been done by the Women's Budget Group, and it's the English Women's Budget Group, creating a care economy, where they're really, very strongly advocating that we create a new type of care economy that recognises all of the unpaid care. This has been rehearsed for years and years and years, and it's really difficult. It's really difficult to get policymakers to actually do anything about it. But you know what? Each wee step, and if we can provide, you look at initiatives and we can provide evidence that they are positively impactful, then, I think it's just one step at a time, isn't it? I think we all agree it's difficult.
Thank you, Joan. And I think that idea of teasing out some of the complexities with these things. So, for example, flexible working, it can be amazing, but it can also be an excuse to increase the care responsibilities. So, how is that explored to see both what is intended and what is unintended? So, thank you very much, Joan. Any other questions?
Could I just quickly respond to? Yes. Well, it's not responding particularly, but it's just Joan's comments have triggered something for me, which is, I think we also, obviously this is largely a group of researchers, so it's not we doing it necessarily, but generally speaking, I think my experience in Australia is that social entrepreneurs, as well as many other parts of civil society, need to get better at understanding how policy advocacy works. So what problem are we solving for governments by introducing these sorts of issues? So, Joan's comments was just making me think about that. I think we're in countries where there's some fairly similar economic dynamics at play at the moment. We know in the Australian context that if women had greater participation in the economy, it would increase, Australia's economy by a minimum of about $225 billion, I think was the recent quote. But the big blocker to that is lack of childcare, lack of availability of childcare services. So there's a really good reason to, look at the care economy in a really pragmatic way. And I think I find that social entrepreneurs and social enterprise advocates in Australia do struggle a little bit to work out what's the problem that they will solve, partly because of the huge diversity of the social economy. They, as I said earlier, it's one label that covers off on a whole lot of different activities. And I think that there's something in that about affecting policy change that needs to be addressed.
And also, it's a good point, Joe, and look at how systemically some of these things come together, because what we do tend to get in New Zealand is well, here's a problem, here's a charity, a social enterprise, a not-for-profit, we start one. There's another, we start one. I think we've got so many per capita, rather than looking at some of the systemic ways in which these things come together, and how you, from a policy point of view, can really make systemic change.
And that's my observation in the field, is that the social entrepreneurs and social enterprises that are focused on systems change are typically focused much more strongly on collaboration and ecosystem level initiatives than their own individual business. Now, of course, I'm not making a value judgment about it. When you run an individual business, you need to make that business sustainable. So, you know, it can be create incredible pressures for individual social entrepreneurs. But I do think that sort of systems change work that, you know, was the sort of early articulation of why social enterprise was fantastic. You know, that's the key, and it's, you know, mostly unrealised, I think.
Thank you. A final question, comment before we turn over to Colette. Anything else? Anybody's got on their mind, or they want to raise or ask? That's great. Look, thank you very much. I just want to again thank the panelists. It's been a great conversation this morning or this evening, this afternoon, wherever you are. And also want to thank the people that have come on live, and also to say hello to everybody that's going to be listening to the recording. Hope you enjoy it as well. And a particular thanks to Anne. Without Anne, we certainly wouldn't have come together this morning. So really appreciate everything that Anne has done behind the scenes to bring us here today. So thank you, and I'll pass over to Colette.
Thanks, Christine, and well done on not just, you know, keeping control of that panel, but, you know, pulling out such fantastic insights. And yes, again, can I add my thanks to Anne, because Anne was one of the first supporters of Global WEP back in 2014 in Stockholm, and she's been with us ever since, and I really do appreciate that. Back when Global WEP was a couple of scribbles on the back of an envelope, so she's helped us to build it into a great network. I found that to be a fascinating discussion, and I just want to pull out a couple of key points that really resonated with me. I think I started at the beginning by saying that from our report with the OECD, I felt that this discussion would highlight for us the fact that whilst there's considerable diversity amongst commercial women entrepreneurs, there is equally the same diversity and indeed similar challenges amongst social women entrepreneurs. And we heard at the beginning from Persephone that some of the key challenges to women in social entrepreneurship was the masculinization of entrepreneurship in general, issues around legitimacy, and this persistent problem of getting sufficient good quality childcare at an affordable price. But added to that, women in social entrepreneurship face this issue of the double or triple bottom line and all that additional reporting that goes with being involved in a social enterprise. We then heard from Jo in terms of the fact that there's a lack of investigation and theorization and general research around women in social entrepreneurship. And because of that, there's a complete lack of understanding of the challenges that they face. Social enterprise across the world isn't given enough priority amongst governments. And, you know, there is this notion of the caring economy across the world. And what exactly does that mean? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Do we have women just coming in to solve problems that government should really be dealing with? Kiri highlighted the issue of diversity for us. Now, Jo talked about this just recently. In her just more recent comments there, but Kiri really gave us some fantastic examples of the different social enterprise activities that Maori women are involved in. And that was a really fascinating insight. And we heard again about the danger of the masculine hero concept and how we need to be careful of that. I think in terms of the policy interventions that we need to be thinking of, we got some great insights from the panel. We heard that we need more affordable childcare. We need more in terms of flexible working built into policy. But again, we need to be careful with that. We need more EDI training across the board. We also need social enterprise for women to be given more priority amongst governments. And there needs to be better representation of women and diverse women in policy making. And also Kiri then drew our attention to this symbolism, this notion that women are different, their bodies are different, and that impacts on their decision making and their activities. But I'll just finish with this point, and it's something that Kiri told us about, and I absolutely love this. This notion of the powerful woman in Maori culture. And that is a woman who knows herself, and she knows what's behind her and in front of her. And I think if you've got women who know that, why would you not have them involved in policy making? It's ludicrous that they're left out so much, not just in social entrepreneurship policy, but in entrepreneurship policy in general. So with that, can I thank the panel? And I'm going to hand back to Dinah just to close off.
Thanks so much, Colette. And that really struck a chord with me, this concept of the powerful Maori women. I'm going to investigate that further. Thank you. Beautifully curated, wonderfully chaired. Thank you so much. And just given us so much food for thought.